and welcome to another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have a new guest this week, and her name is Megan Gersh, and we are talking all about branding, website design, all the things that go towards creating your brand and putting it out to the world. Few housekeeping things though. One, Milanote class is out on Skillshare. If you have not checked it out, remember to go to NacheSnow.com/Skillshare. If you're not already a Skillshare member, you can get 30 days by using my affiliate link, NacheSnow.com/Skillshare. And then you're like pretty much watching my class for free. But you guys know I love Skillshare. I've paid for Skillshare for years. I've learned all kind of things from how to use Midjourney to hand lettering years ago, all the things. Anyway, so definitely go check that out. Also, the season will be wrapping up in several weeks, and then I will be focusing on a new product, a Notion class, or a actual physical planner, which I've talked about for a little bit. So I just want to see what the appetite is out there. So in the show notes for this page, NacheSnow.com/178, I will have a vote for the planner or vote for Notion link. And there you can also fill out a survey where I just ask you a few questions. So if I get more votes for one versus the other, I at least know what you're looking for. So look for that in the show notes under the link section. And as always, if you have not already, my friends, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate me 5 stars. If you're not listening on Apple Podcasts, if you're listening on Spotify or what have you, please give me 5 stars there. You're listening or watching this on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up. And wherever you're listening, please subscribe. And if you find that this episode is helpful, sharing is caring, my friends. So please share this episode with someone you think it will benefit. So let's get to Megan. And even before I get to Megan, I just want to say, you guys know my background. Well, some of you guys know who've been following me for a while. I do have a background in graphic design and web design. I don't do it anymore, but I still have a love and passion for it. And I strongly believe in building strong brands. And if you haven't already, I forgot what season it was. It might have been like the second or third season of the Studio 78 podcast. I had a brand series, episodes 56 through 59, and it talked about discovering your why and importance of visuals and websites and branding. I've also had in it on a couple of times. The last episode I had with her was episode 152, where we talked about the difference between a business strategist, a brand strategist, and a brand consultant, because sometimes people get confused about that. And then last but not least on this topic, I had Nache on in 161, particularly talking mainly about video and the importance of video, because that's also part of the content that you create. And we'll dive into that a little bit. And so now I have Megan on, which is great because I like to touch on this topic at least once a year, if not once a season. So I'm glad she reached out because we talk a little bit about everything from what is a brand, what you should think about when creating a brand, mastering your visuals and creating your visuals so you can figure out how to incorporate that into your brand, to why a brand guide is important and how it can keep you on track. We also kind of dive deep into website and creating a website, what you need to think about. It's kind of the platforms that we recommend. She's on Showit, which I haven't tried yet, but I am tempted. I am so tempted to try it, and you'll hear why in this episode. We also talk about SEO and accessibility and mobile versus desktop when it comes to designing a website. So there's just so many good things in here. She definitely knows her stuff. So please have a listen. And this is great for people who are just starting out or for people who have an existing brand. And there's just some great tips in here that you should think about in order to make sure that your site is optimized, or if you're thinking about a rebrand, what to consider when you're rebranding. And she also has some templates too. So anywho, without further ado, here's Megan. Hello, Megan. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I am excited that you reached out. It's funny because there was several seasons ago, like I did like this whole branding series that people loved. And I was like, man, I haven't talked about branding in a while. I do need to bring that back because everybody can benefit from strengthening their brand in all aspects of that. Before we go into some tips and tricks, I just want people to get to know Megan a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit about your origin story and how you got into design?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have always been an art kid. I did artwork all growing up throughout high school. I went to college for media arts and design. And then I went to essentially got a job straight out of college. And so that was like my dream job. Like I always had wanted to figure out a way to meld those two passions of art and music. And I got this job as a graphic and web designer at Live Nation, which is amazing. Like it was like I was doing websites and such for Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber and Katy Perry and like all of these like incredible celebrities. But then a few years later, I decided I wanted to move out to California. And so I moved out here, got a job in radio as an interactive producer, and then eventually moved on to be a creative director for a few music venues here in Los Angeles. And about 5 years ago, I guess it's about 5 years at this point, but 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to try my hand at entrepreneurship. And so I've honestly never been happier. I should have taken the jump a little bit sooner, but it's the best. Like I have my own branding and website design business now.
Yeah, and then just curious, what does an interactive producer do at the radio?
So we would work on all of the digital things. So like the website, the apps, making sure that all of the content was available for the internet, social media, all of that stuff. So
Oh, nice. Okay. And so when you finally said, okay, let me dip my toe, let me see what this entrepreneurship world is about, were you already freelancing? And then also, did you have a specific customer set in mind? Like, oh, since I'm already in the music industry, I think I want to stay with that.
yeah, definitely. So I have always freelanced in my career on and off the entire time since the beginning of working at Live Nation. I've just always taken on freelance projects on the side. And so it got to the point when I was at my last job where it was like I was going to a 9 to 5 job and then coming home and like working until midnight on all of my like freelancing projects. And I was like, this is not it cannot sustain for like ever. I had to make that decision. I was like, clearly there is a demand for the work that I'm doing. I wasn't even doing really any marketing at that point. It was just like all word of mouth, like folks referring me to their friends and just picking up projects here and there. And it just came to the point where I was like, I think I can really do this thing because like clearly there's a demand for what I'm doing. So when I first started taking my business full time, I wanted to focus on music stuff. And of course, a few years later, COVID hit. And so I had that the entire music industry got put on hold. So you can imagine I had to pivot at that point. So I started working with a lot of artists, a lot of creatives. And now I'm actually in the middle right now of a pivot back to the music industry because that is like really where my heart kind of lies. And yeah, that's my journey.
And then just curious too, while you were working at Live Nation, were you working through like a manager or did you actually have to talk to the musicians to figure out like what type of vibe they wanted for their brand?
So each of the artists had an account manager at the place where I worked. And so they would get direction like from the artist team and then we would implement it.
And then for you, what's like your process, right? As you're dealing with different musicians with different, of course, like styles and personalities. And you're trying to think through, okay, how do I make sure that this website reflects who they are? Like, how do you go about figuring out, okay, these are the colors, the fonts, the element, this is the story I want to tell with this particular product?
So this took me a long time to perfect in my own business, like my own process. But what I have found is the best way to approach this is from a core values and mission perspective. So
Mm,
the artist really needs to, or whoever I'm working with, the creative, whoever, the client really needs to get clear on why they're doing what they're doing and what they truly stand for,
mm,
because those are the two items that are going to feed into every single other part of the marketing,
mm.
including the branding design elements, including the website, including any print materials, emails, all of that stuff, like the brand voice. All of that comes back to why is it that you're doing what you're doing? Who are you trying to speak to? And how can we most authentically speak to those people and get that message across?
And then once you have that picture and you know that story, then you can start like the creation process.
Exactly.
I'm going to go back to the basics because I know I have listeners. I have some that are just starting out and they're like, oh my God, website. What do I do? And then when I have some people who have websites and that they've had them for years, or a brand in general. I won't just say websites, but just a brand, right? But maybe it's not doing what they wanted to do. So just to go back to the basics a little bit, how do you define a brand, right? Because sometimes people just, oh, that's a logo. That's just, a website. It's just this. But how do you define brand?
Branding to me is how your audience perceives you. It's we when we think of branding, it's like logo, colors, all of these things, but these are branding design elements. But the overarching idea of a brand is like what you feel towards a brand, right? Do you feel comforted? Do you feel empowered? There are certain brands where you look at them and maybe you might feel motivated, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is truly what branding is. And like the logo and the color palette and the repetition of these visual elements are a part of that. And
Mm-hmm.
they're a part of building that recognition over time and reinforcing that message. But ultimately, again, going back to the core values and the mission, that is how you're going to get that across, is by repetition of the colors and the logo and all of that. You use those as vehicles to get your mission and your core values across to your audience.
And someone out there might be like, but Megan, like, how do I figure that out? Like, I don't know. Like, I want to, start this knitting business that's getting popular and I know I need to create a website for it. Like, how do I figure out what it is I want to portray to the world? What advice would you give them?
Oh, this is my favorite question, and it's something that I run through with all of my clients. And the first part is just through doing some of that deeper work. What is that message that you want to talk about in the world? What is your core mission? And then
Mm,
also taking a look at some research, right? Like taking a look at who are your competitors in the space, even if you don't consider them to be competitors, who are people that are doing similar things to you?
mm,
And also, how can you differentiate from those people? How are you going to be doing things a little bit different? Because that differentiation factor almost helps you to create a niche of one. Like
mm,
you
mm,
eliminate all the competition because you're the only one that can do whatever it is that you're doing that way.
mm. And so let's say someone does the work, they fill out like maybe even a little worksheet, they answer the questions, they feel, okay, I know who I am, I know what I want to put out to the world. Like, what's my next step? Like, do I work with a designer and do I start with a logo? Do I start with a website? Do I start with they're like, how do I start? What should that look like?
So the answer to this is going to be like, it depends on where you're at in business, right? If you're just starting, like I have nothing against DIYing and bootstrapping it, right? Just because that's where you're at in
Mm,
business and that's what you need to do to get the job done. Once you're a year or two into business and you have some more proven concepts, concepts of these two products or services are working, maybe you have more of the means to work with a designer. And that's when I recommend usually, okay, it's time to level up. And imagine if you're having this success at a DIY stage, what success you're going to have at a professional help stage. Really helps to elevate that and elevate your business in a lot of other ways as well. But going back to what should you start with? Branding is always the first step. It is the foundation to every other piece of your marketing. And it's the piece that I recommend having in place, because if you don't have branding in place, how are your social media graphics going to look? How's your website going to look? How are your flyers going to look? Any kind of print materials that you might need to distribute to internally or externally without having those guidelines in place, because branding are those elements being like the logo, the color palette, the fonts, how specific examples of like how things should look in conjunction to one another. It should have examples within that guide of you should overlap text here, or this is how you should treat images or photography. It's just those baseline guidelines. It's just the first step within the process, and it helps to guide the rest of the pieces of the puzzle.
Let's say the DIYers who are like, okay, I'm just starting out, can't afford to get a professional logo created, so I'm going at it. I'm going at this alone. And what are some things they should think about? Because I know sometimes people are like, what colors do represent my style? Or how do I choose a font? Or do I have to draw something? Like what advice do you have for the DIYers?
What I would recommend starting with is getting a basic handle on design psychology. There's a lot that goes into strategic branding, such as, let me just give you an example. So like rounded corners might on text or on images might give you a more friendly feel than a squared off corner. Simple things like that might seem subtle can make such a big impact when implemented consistently. Looking at the design psychology of fonts, of colors, of how to treat imagery. So maybe go on Pinterest and take a look at like different photography styles and see, is there something that you really connect with? Brand photography, I think, is such an underrated component that a lot of people don't put a lot of effort into make it. It can be one of the most impactful pieces of your brand, and a lot of people are sleeping on it.
Yeah, and talk about that a little bit more, because it's so interesting, because when it comes to brand photography and videos, right? There was this one girl, her name is escaping me right now, but I saw her videos on Instagram and I'm like, oh my God, they're just so gorgeous, because like her whole feed, you knew she was going into some kind of program, and she's using the same treatment on all the videos to give them this consistent look and feel, where they were muted, a little dark, right? But when you look through her Instagram account, you're like, okay, I know her style. Like you immediately got her vibe. So when you say that, can you just unpack that a little bit for people who might not get how, and I know it goes deeper than just filters and stuff. It's like the style of the photography, like a whole bunch of stuff. But can you unpack like how imagery can really represent who you are and the style of imagery you decide to use?
I just got this killer tip from one of my colleagues, actually. I'll share it here too. But Erica Reitman is a business coach who I love to follow her stuff. She has like a really amazing viewpoint when it comes to brand photography. One of her best tips is to look at like fashion magazines or different businesses outside of your niche to get inspiration, because those are the types of like editorial and stuff like that. Look through a magazine and see what kind of images jump out at you and grab your attention, just because those are the types of images that are really going to help to elevate the look and feel of your brand. So the next time you're at like a magazine rack or something like that, take a look and flip through some magazines to see just when you stop on an image to see what is catching your attention. Is it bright colors? Is it somebody's hair? Is it the motion that's captured in that photo? What is it that's like really gripping about that photo and just take a mental note of like how you might be able to integrate some of those visual elements.
Yeah. I think another good resource that I love now, I'll put a link to it in my show notes, and I'm probably a little hyper about this, but I'm a Pinterest head. I love Pinterest. And so my
Mhm.
boards are very curated on Pinterest. And so whenever I'm like, okay, like what is my vibe? I just go into Pinterest, and when I look at my feed, I can immediately see the colors, the styles, and everything that I gravitate to because I purposely, for the most part, pin images that have a certain look and feel. Not everybody does that on Pinterest. Sometimes people are just pinning a pin because they just want the content. Not me. Like I'm pinning because it has a certain look and feel. But that's kind of like my magazine, right? Like if I go to that board and I'm like, okay, these are the colors, these are the type of filters I want. This is the style of photography that I'm gravitating to.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a digital magazine.
Yeah. Curious. Okay, so the DIY person, they're going to do the homework and they're going to figure out like the psychology behind design, and they're going to get something that kind of gets there. They're going to pay attention to their photos and then the website.
Yeah.
I've said this on past episodes when talking about websites. I do have opinions about some sites I love, some sites I don't love. I'm not going to taint Megan,
Same.
people. I'm going to see what she has to say. But curious, just what do you recommend people keep in mind? And are there particular kind of hosting sites that you recommend for people?
When it comes to strategy, you always have to be thinking about your audience, right? They are at the forefront of your mind when you are building out the different pieces of your website. Think about what would they need to know first, second, third, etc. How do you build that trust as you scroll down the page? Like making sure that you have a call to action and opportunity for them to take action on your offers, making sure that you are building that trust with maybe showing a few testimonials from people that you have worked with or adding different logos of the companies that you have worked with, showing some of your past work. Like showing those samples is one of the best ways to show people what you're capable of and your skill set. So thinking about what are the different questions that your ideal client might have before they work with you, and how
Mm-mm.
can you communicate those different things on each of the pages where it makes sense. Now, when it comes to the different platforms that I recommend, my favorite platforms to use are Showit, Squarespace for service-based businesses, and then also Shopify for e-commerce businesses.
Agree. I've never used Showit before, but I have seen some really good websites that are using Showit. I've started like when people ask that what platforms I should use, I've started to add that one to it because I've heard that it's pretty easy to use.
It's very easy to use and it's very drag and drop, so you don't have to know any code. I'm actually in the process right now of creating several website templates. And
Mm,
so I have a few up on my site, but I'm making some new ones for geared towards the music industry. But the reason that I love it so much is that it's not a big learning curve for
mm.
somebody to take the template and customize it to be their own. Like it's a few clicks, you can change it to be completely yours within. I always say like you can launch your new site within days instead of months. So it's pretty powerful.
So I started out on, and I am still on WordPress and have it on a host. I just know WordPress and my
Mm-hmm.
brain just works for WordPress. My shop is on Shopify, right? Because Shopify has all the things, right? If you're selling something, it's
Mm-hmm.
just really easy to do it on Shopify. Not that you couldn't do it on WordPress. WordPress, it just takes a little bit more work, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, even though I still recommend them, so if there's some Squarespace lovers out there, you guys know I still recommend Squarespace. But I think because my brain is so wired to use WordPress, I had the hardest time adapting to Squarespace. I tried it one time for a website and then I had to move it to Shopify because I was like, I can't do this. And so, do you find that some clients gravitate to the back end of certain platforms more than others?
I've heard, yeah, this is something that I discuss with clients too before we start working on a website design together. I will say that if you are a WordPress user, and this is just like a little, just planting the little seed here for Showit, is that if you're a blogger on WordPress,
Yeah.
the blog section of Showit is actually all WordPress. It's literally,
Interesting.
yeah, so you can use the Showit editor to create what your blog is going to look like by dragging and dropping the different elements, but the
Mm.
actual like input of the post, the tags, categories, all of that stuff, it's a WordPress backend.
Huh. I didn't
I
know
know.
that.
I know. It's like the best of both worlds.
Okay. Because that ease of use, right? But then you still have that WordPress engine, which is nice.
Exactly.
Curious for your website, who did you decide to go with?
So my current website is on Showit, and I
It's
just switched it over at the beginning of this year. I used to be on WordPress. I was on WordPress for years,
Oh,
years and years
wow.
and
And you
years.
made the switch. How was that? The transition?
It was easy. Honestly, it was done within a day. So yeah, it was great.
Nice. Yeah, because I know there are some people out there, because even Nache, who I sometimes have on as a co host, last year, I think it was last year, she went through the process of moving her WordPress site to, it might have been to Squarespace, and she was dreading it, right? Because you're just like, oh my goodness, how seamless is this going to be? I know I need to make this move. Am I going to lose content? So that's good to know. Like for you, it was pretty seamless making that transition.
Yeah, the only thing I will say is that so I used to host my WordPress on SiteGround, and I also had my email set up through them. So that is one thing, additional thing that I had to deal with is I had to get a Google, like a G Suite account and set that up and make sure that all of that was working properly because it just didn't transfer over when I made the switch.
Nice. It's funny. I'm on SiteGround too. WordPress and
They're
SiteGround.
they're the best. Honestly, I love SiteGround. It's so fast, so reliable. The team is amazing.
They are. I have moved. I was on Bluehost for a while, but it just didn't work for me. And I ended up doing like a ton of research, and everyone was recommending SiteGround. And I think I've been on SiteGround now for like 6 years, 7.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really great. I love them.
But no, it's good to know too. It sounds like even though you're coming from SiteGround to Showit, and I know I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, people, that Showit has a good uptime and you haven't had any issues with hosting or anything like that with them.
I haven't. And honestly, people ask me all the time, in addition to that, like, how has your SEO been? And it's even better on Showit than it was on
Really?
WordPress. Yeah.
Because I was going to ask you just about some SEO things people should keep in mind, but you found that because I know sometimes when people switch platforms to whatever,
Mhm.
a lot of times their web views tank, right? And that's another reason people are scared to make that switch.
Yeah, I had the opposite thing happen to me, which when I was rebuilding this new version of my site, like obviously it'd been probably about 4 years or so. And so I had learned also a lot about SEO in that time. And so I was able to put into practice a lot of those SEO kind of components that I had learned about. That's probably somewhat of what happened there, but yeah, it's doing a lot better than it was. I'm getting almost double the organic hits that I was back when I was on WordPress.
I can see that too because it's so interesting. Unless I go up in tiers or whatever for SiteGround, I think I need like a little bit more horsepower for my website in order for it to load faster. But I could see hypothetically if I went to Showit, it would probably be able to handle all the things that I have going on my website, and then SEO would rank it higher because my page loads faster, right? Because they're probably dinging me right now a little bit because my page load is slower than Google wants it to be.
Yeah, that's the thing with WordPress too. It just is always evolving, always updating. And at least for me, like with a site that was 4 years old plus, it was the kind of thing where the theme wasn't adding updates as often as they should have. And so that was affecting the plugins and it just was becoming harder and harder to update. And it was just felt like it was time for a website redesign. Plus, a bunch of stuff had changed in my business as far as like services and that kind of thing. So that's always like a good time for a little website overhaul.
Yeah. And folks, of course, I'm going to have a link to Megan's webpage, but I love, number one, she's taking this branding stuff real serious because her hair literally matches the website, which I
Well, thank
love.
you.
So she's all in on the brand. And for your website, and then even for the websites that you develop, what are some of the SEO things that you keep in mind? Because I think people hear, oh, it needs to be optimized and you need to do this. And they're like, what does that mean? Do I just need to put the right keywords? What is an SEO approved website? Can you break that down for them?
So, when it comes to SEO, like there's obviously a lot of different things that you need to consider, and it's a longer term strategy. That's something that you need to keep in mind. But there are certain structural things that you can do with your website design, including putting keywords in the file names of your images. That's a big one that a lot of people miss. Compressing your images. So you can use a compressor like tinypng.com, run your images through there, and it will help to minify your images. So compress the file size of your images. Also, geotagging your images. So if you have a local based business, there's this website called GeoImager that you can run your images through there, and it will add a specific location tag to your images, which helps with local SEO. Once all of these things are complete, you could upload your images to your website. Then you'll want to add alt text to each of your images. So alt text is something that helps with accessibility. It essentially tells the website visitor what is going on in the image. If somebody that is coming to your website is visually impaired, if they're using a screen reader, they'll be able to consume what that image actually is. There's other best practices like using headers on your website, making sure that your header structure follows best practices and that kind of thing. But ultimately, if you have all those structural components in place, it's going to come down to new content on your website and blogging. And so that's where a lot of people really struggle, is integrating those keywords into those blog posts, making sure that you have consistent content, just because Google loves that fresh content. Google loves that newness. And yeah, that's what I would say for that.
No, I think there's a lot of great tips. And one thing that I know a lot of people are concerned about too is like accessibility and making sure their website is accessible. Yeah. Besides alt tags, does anything else come to mind that people need to consider when they're creating their website?
The first thing that's coming to mind is mobile accessibility. So making sure that you are testing your website on every mobile device that you can get your hands on. So, test it on your iPhone, test it on your iPad. If you have a tablet, or if you have internet on your television, even test it on that to see like how it looks there. Any device that you're able to access the internet on, test it. Because you never know without testing, like if there's some way that you can fix something, if content's going to be getting cut off. The goal really should be to make sure that all of the content is visible, everything looks good, if there's enough contrast on the page, that kind of thing. There are websites out there that you can use to do color contrast checking to make sure that if you have black text on a white background, obviously that's a good contrast ratio so that it's easy for people to read. If you have a lime green text on a yellow background, it's probably a lot harder to read. So making sure that your website is passing those kinds of checks is really helpful as well.
I designed long time ago. And I remember, I feel like I'm aging myself. Like when cell phones started to become like really big, especially like when the iPhone kind of came out with the screen and stuff. And they're like designed for mobile first and then designed for like the computer or whatever. Do people still design that way? Or how do you go about making sure it works in both platforms, like mobile and on a computer?
The first thing is through testing. A lot of the website platforms at this point have mobile view, so you can literally design and move things around via drag and drop. Like, I'm just thinking of Showit off the top of my head, where you can literally just drag things and resize them as you need to fit a mobile device. But yeah, it's absolutely of paramount importance still that you design for mobile and mobile first. Think of all of the times that you're holding your phone in your hand. There's chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you might be holding a phone in your hand. Like,
Right.
we just all are so connected to our phones all the time that it's just so important. Like, over half of internet use at this point is conducted via mobile. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, when I look at my metrics, and I guess that's another thing too, people make sure you're getting those metrics to your website. I think it's like 50-50 for me, which is interesting. I thought it would be like more mobile, but mine is like 50-50 when it comes to people on mobile or on a computer. So I was like, oh, okay, there's still some old school folks out there like myself that'll use the computer to look up stuff.
I mean, this is going to depend on your audience too, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's going to vary from niche to niche, and it's always just good to look at your metrics.
Yeah. As we like wrap up here, when it comes to branding and building your brand, are there things that you want to share with the audience, like things that they should keep in mind?
The most important thing when it comes to branding, and this sounds so cliche, but consistency is like the name of the game when it comes to branding. The more consistently you can show up in your graphics, in the way that you speak to your audience, in the language that you're using, if you have catchphrases, and using those consistently can be so helpful. What your goal should be is to build that brand awareness, build that brand recognition. And the only way you can do that is through consistency. So that would be the number one. And number two is, honestly, I know that this kind of goes against what a lot of other brand designers would say, but I always like to tell my clients that once you have your brand guide in place, it should be just that. It's a guide, but it's not like a prison. Like, it's not,
Right.
you're not tied to this forever. Like, your brand is going to change and evolve as your business evolves, right? If something happens in your business where you have to pivot or shift, let it pivot or shift. Like, you have to allow yourself that flexibility, where this is the home base that we always go back to. Things happen, things change, and you're probably not going to have the same brand forever.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned a brand guide, because people are like, oh, a what? A brand guide? Can you tell people like what's usually in a brand guide?
This is something that I work with all my clients on. And basically, this is a PDF document that outlines your colors, your fonts, your different brand photography styles, all of the different examples for how all of these different elements should work together. Your logo, different variations, iconography, patterns, textures, all of these things, and like how they play together in the bigger picture of your different marketing components. But it should give you some real world examples of, if you were to do a PDF, maybe this is how it would look. And so that way it will help you to understand like how each of these components should play with one another.
Now, and I feel like it is, especially in the beginning, it's right, like a really good guide. And then hopefully after time, like people will just know, right? You just know what to do because it's like second nature. But in the beginning, it's, oh, wait a minute. This is the hex code for the colors I should use. This is right, like my style that I'm trying to maintain.
Yeah. And it can be helpful too whenever you bring on like a new team member, if you're working with somebody like a contractor or something like that, being able to hand them the brand guide and be like, this is how we are portraying our brand. In theory, they should be able to create assets or work with you in a way that aligns with that vision.
I think sometimes people get like overwhelmed and like, they're like, okay, I have like this brand guide and I need to start creating for social. What tools do you recommend? Do you have any like favorite tools that you tell your customers to use in order to create graphics or edit videos or help them make sure that they're creating images or graphics or putting filters on things that match with their brand. Because I think people get overwhelmed. Okay, I got this brand guide, but like, how do I execute it?
Yeah, definitely. So this is something that I include with my branding packages is I always include social media templates. And so this sets the brand up on the right foot, being like, okay, here's a good starting point for like how things might look in your social media feed, maybe on your Instagram, maybe in your Instagram highlights, those kinds of things. But it gives you like a good foundation for here's a good starting point. I like to use Canva
Mm.
for those types of graphics just because it's so easy to share with other people on the team. Anyone can set up a free account. And it just makes it really easy to share with clients. That being said, like a lot of the branding elements, logo, textures, all of that kind of good stuff, I create those in Adobe and then bring them into Canva.
I know, love Adobe. But I
Yeah,
know for some people, they're like, ah! Because it is a learning curve.
for sure.
Can you let the listeners know how you stay organized?
So I use Asana, which is a project management software.
Mm.
So anytime I bring on a new project to work with a client, I will set up a new project in Asana, and that's how we communicate back and forth on feedback, all of that kind of good stuff. I also love Google Drive, the Google Suite products. I find that each of them makes it really easy to like schedule things and all of that kind of good stuff. I also, from like a brand building perspective, I also really love repurpose.io, which is a platform that you can use in order to set up workflows so that you auto publish your content to other
Oh.
platforms. Yeah, it's really awesome. I think it's $25 a month or something like that, but it's so worth it. They also have a function on there where you can, so I usually create from a TikTok first perspective. That's how most of my workflows go. And so they have a function there where you can automatically download all of your TikToks to Google Drive with no watermark. So that's in itself to me is worth $25 a month because I create a lot of TikTok content, but it's really great for building your brand across multiple channels with minimal effort.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I have to check that out.
Yeah,
And do you have a hobby?
I do. This is going to sound funny and not related to anything, but I love hula hooping. I love it.
Oh, wow. But I feel like that's very Cali. That's very right. I feel like Cali would have maybe like hula hoop clubs or right.
I go to a lot of music festivals, and one time I saw some ladies there that were hula hooping, like hoop dancing. And I was like, oh, that looks
That's
interesting. I'd love to
cool.
learn that. And yeah, I took a few classes here in LA, which is also like very LA. And yeah, I just love it so much.
It's so funny because I'm just like, man, I can hear just when you said hula hoop. Like I remember as a kid, you had it where it makes the little sound, and I did love, and that's like some good exercise. And I hate exercising, but I would hula hoop.
It's really good exercise.
Yeah, so maybe people, there will be a hula hoop in my future. And then can you just let the listeners know like where to find you if they're like, "Hey Megan, I need maybe your services or maybe your templates or if there's anything else too that you offer, can please just break down what you offer and then where they can find you."
So you can find me at megangersch.com. It's megangersch.com. I'm on all the social medias. TikTok and Instagram are my main ones, but I'm pretty much everywhere. As I said, I repurpose everywhere. And if you go onto my website, I have a few different items there in my shop. I have website templates as well as a DIY brand kit. If you're not quite ready for some custom branding, this might be a good option for you. But yeah, my two main services are custom website design and custom branding. So hit me up.
Perfect, Megan. This has been perfect. I feel as though we are now going to see better websites out there that
Oh, I hope
people
so.
listening is going to be optimized. They're going to have their brand story. It's going to be great. They're going to be making money. They're going to be all up on Showit using your templates.
Oh, I hope so.
But thank you so much for, coming on the podcast and sharing those amazing tips.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
Wow, what an amazing episode. I just love all of the practical tips and actionable tips that Megan has mentioned in this episode. For those of you guys who are going through a rebrand or getting your or just starting with creating a brand, you probably should re-listen to this episode, take some notes, and really use that in your strategy as you are developing your brand and all the elements that are a part of it. But great episode, great tips. Loved talking to her. Definitely go check her out. I mean, she is so on brand, like very consistent. I wasn't joking when I said in the episode, like, from all the things from her social media to her website to literally her physical presence with the hair is all like, it all kind of goes together. And so she does a remarkable job of bringing it all together and having a brand story of her own, which she then translates to the customers that she's working with too. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Love to hear from you. Just a few housekeeping things, of course. Remember, I mentioned that I'm trying to figure out which product to focus on, Notion class or physical planner. You guys know I'm digital and analog. I use the two in order to keep myself organized. So I have ideas about both of them. So love to get your feedback. Link in the show notes. Click the one that you prefer. Please fill out the survey so I know what you want and what I should focus on in October and November. Okay, so if you love this episode, you know what to do, my friends. Do I hear it? Yes. Rate Nache, Studio 78 Podcast, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. And rate me Spotify, wherever else, whatever their ratings is, please 5 stars, thumbs up. If you're on YouTube, hey, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe. Share this episode with anyone you think might need it. And until next time, my friends. So season is slowly wrapping up so I can make space to do some things and also like interview other people for the next season. But I'm so excited. The season has been so great. I've been lucky to have been able to get some amazing women entrepreneurs. I hope you guys have enjoyed this season too. But anywho, I will be back next week. So until then, check out the show notes, nachesnow.com/178. And I will be in your ear in another week. Take care. Bye.